The story begins in 1944 in the South Pacific, where two planes are locked in an aerial dogfight. The American pilot is shot down but manages to bail out just in time, surviving the crash. From the air, he sees that the Japanese plane is also going down, so he runs toward the crash site, determined to finish off his enemy. He opens fire, but misses every shot and soon runs out of ammunition. The Japanese pilot, who has also survived, starts chasing him. With both of them out of bullets, the Japanese soldier pulls out his machete and charges at the American, forcing him back to the edge of a cliff. Unarmed, the American desperately tries to stop the blade by grabbing it with his bare hands. The Japanese fighter, still having the upper hand, prepares to eliminate him with his wakizashi. But at that very moment, a gigantic gorilla's hand appears on the horizon and nearly crushes them both. Years later, in 1973, during the Cold War, two scientists from an organization called Monarch meet with the senator. They show him satellite images of a skull-shaped island that had never been detected before. Bill, one of the project's leaders, claims that something unknown on that island has brought down planes and sunk ships. The senator is not convinced and is about to leave, but geologist Brooks explains that a Russian satellite will pass over the area in 3 days and capture the same images. If the United States does not act now, the Soviets will get there first. With that argument, the senator finally agrees to fund the expedition and promises to organize the trip with a military escort. At the Da Nang Air Base in Vietnam, the last group of American soldiers is preparing to return home after the end of the war. However, at Monarch's request, the general in charge summons Colonel Packard and orders him and his men to escort the scientists to the mysterious island, delaying their return. Meanwhile, in Saigon, Bill looks for a tracker and ends up in a bar, where he finds James, a former British Army captain and an expert in survival and tracking who now spends his days drinking. When he hears about the mission, James lists all the dangers that could eliminate them on the island and demands 5 times more money, plus a bonus if they come back alive. Even though it is expensive, Bill and Brooks agree, knowing they need him. When James asks what map they will use, Brooks lies and says they do not have one, claiming that is why they need his skills to guide them. In Thailand, a photographer named Mason learns about the expedition and asks to join so she can document everything with her camera. The next morning, the team gathers at the port of Bangkok. The supervisor explains that the island is surrounded by a permanent storm system, which has kept it completely isolated from the rest of the world. Thanks to Colonel Packard's helicopters, they will be the first to cross that barrier. Brooks then reveals the plan. They will enter from the southern coast and drop explosives to make the island shake, in order to study what lies beneath the surface. Major Chapman adds that the storm will block all communications, leaving them cut off until a resupply team arrives from the north in 3 days. With everything ready, they set off toward the island. As they approach, the supervisor notices that the storm far larger and more dangerous than expected and suggests aborting the mission. An argument breaks out, but Colonel Packard decides to take the risk and orders his men to proceed. The helicopters fly into the turbulent cloud, violently shaken by wind and rain, until they finally break through the storm. And on the other side, an incredible sight is revealed, a bright green island bathed in sunlight. While flying over it, the soldiers spot a flat area and decide to land there to set up their measuring equipment. Once everything is in position, Packard's men detonate the explosives, and the island begins to tremble, revealing that its interior is almost hollow. But at that very moment, a gigantic tree comes flying through the air and pierces one of the helicopters mid-flight. In another aircraft, the crew watches in horror as a colossal hand slams into them and knocks them down with unbelievable ease. As the helicopter crashes, a gigantic gorilla appears before them. The creature grabs the aircraft with its own hands, shakes it in the air, and sends the crew flying straight into its mouth. In shock, the remaining helicopters move in and form a circle around it, firing everything they have, but only succeed in making it even angrier. The monster destroys another helicopter with a single blow. Meanwhile, Chapman tries to maneuver his aircraft, but the gorilla attempts to grab it. The rotor blades slice into its hand, yet the helicopter is damaged and begins to fall out of control. In the middle of the chaos, Colonel Packard picks up a radio signal from a helicopter with survivors and orders a rescue, but before they can reach them, the gorilla crushes it. Enraged, the giant primate charges at Packard's helicopter while his men rake it with machine gun fire. Just before impact, the creature shifts, revealing that another aircraft was firing from behind, causing the two helicopters to collide and explode in midair. When they hit the ground, Packard manages to unfasten his seatbelt and tries to help his co-pilot. But the gorilla reappears, grabs the helicopter with one hand, and hurls it into another, leaving him completely stunned. On the ground, the monster chases the soldiers, and with a single swipe slams one of them into the rotor of the helicopter carrying Mason and James, sending their aircraft spinning out of control and crashing. After destroying all the helicopters, the gorilla finally withdraws. Now James's tracking skills become crucial. Using binoculars, he realizes they are near a river on the southern side of the island, so if they follow it north, they should reach the rendezvous point on the coast within a few miles. Meanwhile, Packard tries to contact other survivors by radio, and Chapman answers, saying he is the only one left alive from his helicopter and that he is about 4 kilometers west of the highest mountain. Just after giving his coordinates, the signal cuts out, and he is completely out of contact. As he moves across the island, Packard gathers more of his men and collects the dog tags of the fallen, finally realizing how many soldiers he has lost. Furious, he sits beside Bill, pulls out his pistol, and demands the whole truth. With no way out, Bill confesses that more than 20 years earlier, the ship he was traveling on with his family was attacked by the gorilla, and he was the only survivor, though no one believed him. Determined to prove he was not crazy, he founded Monarch and devoted his life to investigating legendary creatures. When he failed to find proof, he returned to Skull Island with the expedition and ordered the seismic charges to be dropped to force the monster out of hiding, get photographs and witnesses, and finally prove it was real. Although he knows many of his men died because of Bill, the colonel lets him live, but his hatred for the gorilla only grows stronger. He then decides that after rescuing Chapman, they will head for the supply helicopter, where there are weapons, ammunition, and plenty of explosives, with the goal of eliminating the beast once and for all. Before moving on, Packard holds a brief funeral for the fallen soldiers and swears revenge. The group then begins a long trek to recover the weapons. As they make their way through the forest, one of the soldiers stops to drink water, but suddenly he is impaled by a creature resembling a giant spider with a completely alien appearance. Panicked, the men start firing upward, causing the monster to release twisted webbing that traps Mills, seeing their comrade in danger. Packard and the others use their knives to slice through the creature's legs, forcing it lower and lower. After a hard struggle, Mills manages to break free from the web. It falls to the ground, allowing the soldiers to open fire without fear of hitting him. At last, they manage to eliminate the mutant spider and continue on their way, though deeply shaken by so many losses. Elsewhere on the island, Brooks explains to the rest of the group why Bill hired him. He says that for years he has studied the Hollow Earth theory, which suggests the existence of passages connecting our world to an inner world, and that Skull Island could be one of those gateways, allowing giant creatures to reach the surface. Following the river north, the group comes across a massive buffalo. At first, Slivko becomes very nervous, but James realizes the animal is harmless and tells everyone to stay calm. He orders them to lower their weapons and lets the creature walk away peacefully. After several more miles, they discover the ruins of a temple and begin to explore, but soon they are surrounded by natives armed with spears. From among them steps forward a very peculiar old man who introduces himself as Lieutenant Hank, the American pilot from 1944 who had been stranded on the island since World War II. Hank explains that he has lived with the natives for nearly 30 years, in a village where the gorilla, Kong, is worshipped as a protective god. According to him, the island's people once lived in constant fear of the monsters that inhabited the land, until Kong's parents appeared and began defending them. After many battles, both of them died, and their son became the king of the island, taking on the mission of protecting the humans. That is why Kong attacked the helicopters. The seismic charges awakened several creatures at the same time, forcing him to fight without rest. Hank adds that the largest and most dangerous of all is still asleep, recovering from the battle in which it eliminated Kong's parents. But sooner or later it will wake up, and by then, the gorilla might not even be alive. Meanwhile, on the western side of the island, Major Chapman cleans his wounds in a lake when he sees the giant gorilla appear in the distance. Terrified, he hides behind a rock and watches as Kong drinks water. Suddenly, a colossal squid emerges and the two creatures clash. Kong manages to crush its head and tear off its tentacles, then drags the enormous body back toward his lair. Back in the village, James talks with Hank about the extraction point and invites him to join them on the journey north. The lieutenant, who knows the island like the back of his hand, tells them that reaching it on foot in 3 days is impossible. He then shows them a boat he has been building out of the wreckage of crashed planes. He explains that he abandoned the project when his old enemy, the Japanese pilot, was eaten by one of the giant lizards, leaving the boat unfinished. Until now, while the men work to complete the vessel, Mason spends her time photographing the natives. Suddenly, she hears a strange, deep bellow echoing through the jungle. As she investigates the sound, she finds one of the giant buffalo with its head trapped inside the remains of a helicopter. Moved by the sight, she tries to help by lifting the fuselage, but it is impossible for her alone. At that moment, Kong appears, grabs the helicopter with one hand, and effortlessly tosses it aside, freeing the animal before continuing on his way toward the west. Elsewhere, Colonel Packard advances with his men and discovers a huge bloodstain on a rock wall. This convinces him that the gorilla has been wounded before, giving him even more confidence that they can eliminate it. A few miles away, Major Chapman tries to make radio contact when he realizes that the log he is sitting on is actually a living creature. As it moves, Chapman drops his rifle, and when he picks it up, he fires several shots into the creature's head. He then notices that the animal is not aggressive and backs away, but at that very moment, one of the enormous lizards appears from behind and attacks him. After more than a day of work on the boat, the group at the village finally manages to get it working and sets off upriver toward the north. Hank is filled with hope at the thought that he may finally return to civilization. During the journey, the radio suddenly starts working again, and they receive a call from Packard's group, asking them to fire a flare so they can reunite. Everyone's spirits rise immediately, but the moment of relief is short-lived. Flying creatures attack the supervisor and carry him off into the air. Leaving no chance to save him, the others watch in horror. Despite the loss, they keep moving and manage to regroup with the rest of the team on the river bank. Packard informs them that Chapman is still alive and that he plans to head west to find him. Hank warns him that this area is where the main nest of the giant lizards is located, and that they will need more men if they want to go in there. Mason agrees and suggests pulling back and returning later with reinforcements, but Packard convinces James to move forward, reminding him that his role as a tracker is essential. The group advances west and reaches a valley where the skeletons of Kong's parents lie. As they carefully cross the area, one of the soldiers drops a lit cigarette onto some gunpowder on the ground, causing an explosion that draws the attention of a huge lizard. To hide, some take shelter inside the skull of Kong's mother, while others crouch behind the bones of his father. As the creature approaches, it drops a helmet and a set of dog tags, allowing James to realize that there are no other survivors besides them. They wait for the monster to move away, but just then Bill starts taking photos, and the flash of his camera attracts the predator again. The lizard returns and attacks, throwing everything into chaos. The soldiers open fire, and Hank, using his experience, manages to wound the creature with his machete, while the others shoot with everything they have, trying to stop it before it can strike again. Soon after, the massive lizard begins chasing Mason, determined to make her its next meal. Packard reacts and orders one of his men to attack it with a flamethrower. Enraged, the creature slams the soldier with its tail and hurls him through the air into the skull of Kong's father. The impact causes the fuel tank on his back to explode and sets off several nearby gas grenades. Slivko is knocked unconscious in the middle of the smoke, so James grabs a gas mask and Hank's machete and rushes in to save him, fighting his way through several flying creatures that appear. He manages to reach the young soldier and pull him out, but the giant lizard attacks again. At that moment, Mason throws her lighter onto the gunpowder on the ground, triggering an explosion that finally stops the monster. After the battle, Hank warns them that they are in monster territory and that what they just faced is only the first of many. Once again, he urges them to turn back, but Packard refuses. James then reveals that Chapman is dead and shows his dog tag. Even so, the Colonel says it changes nothing and that he will continue on to get the weapons and eliminate Kong, avenging his soldiers. Hank tries to reason with him, explaining that Kong is the one who keeps the lizards under control, and that if they eliminate him, the island will be overrun by those creatures. But Packard, blinded by rage, insists that he will destroy all the monsters, starting with the gorilla. The argument becomes so tense that Hank even points his machete at him, though Packard easily disarms him. To prevent the situation from ending in tragedy, James steps in and proposes splitting up. He will lead the civilians toward the northern coast, while the soldiers head west in search of the supply helicopter. Later, the troops find some of Chapman's belongings and prepare an ambush that lasts into the night. Meanwhile, on the other side of the island, James and Mason look for the boat and climb up a slope to get a better view. From there, they spot it around a bend in the river. But suddenly, Kong appears right in front of them. The giant approaches them, sniffs them curiously, and, to both of their surprise, allows Mason to touch him without showing any aggression. Amazed, they stand there watching him. At that moment, the soldiers detonate the explosives again, drawing Kong's attention and luring him straight into an ambush. Knowing what is about to happen, Mason and James decide to run back to help, along with Hank. Even so, the gorilla survives the attack. He rises from the water in a rage, hurls boiling water at one of the soldiers, and crushes another. Exhausted, he finally collapses to the ground. Taking advantage of the situation, Packard surrounds Kong with explosives and prepares to detonate them. Just then, James, Mason, Hank, and the others arrive and stop him at gunpoint, realizing that their leader is completely blinded by his thirst for revenge. Even Slivko and the other soldiers turn against him and order him to drop the detonator. At that very moment, the gigantic lizard that eliminated Kong's parents appears. Chaos erupts and everyone runs, leaving Packard alone between the two monsters. The Colonel tries to trigger the explosives, but Kong senses his intentions and attacks him before he can do it. Badly wounded, the gorilla falls and the humans are forced to flee toward the edge of the island, hoping to find some way to escape. To get the rescue team's attention, James asks Mason to climb the nearest hill and fire a flare, while he and the others try to buy time against the danger closing in. Just as the lizard begins to climb, one of the soldiers decides to sacrifice himself to stop it. He pulls out his grenades and stays behind, ready to be devoured along with the creature. However, his sacrifice is in vain because instead of eating him, the monster smashes him with its tail and hurls him against the mountain, where he explodes on impact. At that moment, Kong appears and delivers a massive blow to the lizard's head, but the beast strikes back, biting into his neck. Kong grabs the reptile by the jaws and begins to pry them open with brutal strength, as if trying to tear it in half. He manages to break free, but the creature coils around his arm and slams him to the ground. The gorilla then rips a tree out of the ground, strips off its branches, and uses it like a giant club, hitting with such force that the trunk shatters. Even so, the lizard gets back up, rolls over Kong, and hurls him into the wreck of an old ship, trapping him in its chains. Though pinned, Kong struggles to keep fighting but cannot free himself. When all seems lost, Brooks arrives in the boat and opens fire on the creature, drawing its attention to the humans. At that moment, Mason fires a flare that strikes the monster in the eye, partially blinding it. Summoning all his strength, Kong breaks free from almost all the chains, except one that remains wrapped around his arm and connected to the old ship's propeller. Using that piece of metal, he smashes the lizard in the shoulder and then tightens the chain around its neck, slamming it into the cliff where Mason is standing. The impact sends her into the water, unconscious. Taking advantage of the distraction, the reptile lunges at Kong again. The gorilla strikes it repeatedly in the head and rips open a massive wound in its throat, leaving it seemingly defeated. He then moves toward the water and rescues Mason, but just when it seems everything is over, the lizard attacks once more, wrapping its tongue around Kong's arm and also trapping the photographer. With one final effort, Kong tears his arm free from the monster's jaws and crushes its neck, eliminating it once and for all, avenging the death of his parents. With the danger finally gone, the survivors are rescued and make a pact never to reveal what happened on the island, allowing the great gorilla to live in peace. Everyone returns home, and especially Lieutenant Hank, who after 29 years is finally reunited with his wife and his only son. Don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know what you think about this movie.